This is all about leadership and legacy. What are your key principles of leadership?
I think there are a number. It starts with the obvious, which is whether it's an individual or a team, you've got to be very clear about where you want to go. And as a sailor, I can tell you the most important thing in navigation is deciding where you want to take the boat. And if you don't know where you want to go, you'll go around in circles. So really good leadership starts with a clear vision. But sadly, vision isn't all you need, because you need to know how you're going to deliver that vision. And in addition to knowing how you're going to deliver it, you need to communicate it. And one of the things I find quite a lot in some of the businesses that I work with is you have leaders that have great vision and have a great idea about how they're going to deliver that vision, but then don't communicate it very well. And then I guess as a businessman, I measure everything. So once you've embarked on a leadership program, measuring actually whether you're on track or not, because at the end of the day, certainly during our bid and delivering the games, we were constantly adjusting the trajectory of what we were doing based on the information we were getting. And then my final mantra in the organizations that I work with is that you should celebrate success, celebrate the success of your teams and individuals in your teams. And sometimes individuals in your teams are not working out. And I think it's just as important to take them out of the picture. The thing that I think frustrates many organizations is working with individuals that are not pulling their weight, frankly. And so, a combination, leadership is talked about as one. Actually, it's a whole series of things. And good leaders finally need to, as Seb did so ably during the games, carry the confidence of all those that they're working with.
You touched on some of the points there. Sarah Powell. Sarah, well done. First up with a question. Ruth, moving on from what Keith said, what is it about leadership that makes a significant difference? You mentioned about communication there. So Ruth, just touch on that for us.
For me, there are two elements that are critical in any change that we're trying to do. And I sum them up as narrative and numbers, and it echoes a bit of what Sir Keith was saying, that I think we need to appeal to the emotion, to the story, the why should we do this, but also measure relentlessly to both inspire further action, but also make sure we're actually getting to where we want to get to. And I think numbers and narrative are the two things I keep remembering. I also always remember trying to answer the question, whoever I'm working with, the question is, what's in it for me? Not me, but the person I'm trying to draw into that conversation. Thinking about putting myself in their shoes and listening carefully, because actually for many things that I've been involved in, the answers are in the group. Very much like today, you've got the answers, and it's about finding them and drawing them together and working very much as co-producers of something that you're trying to deliver.
Okay, fine. John Argent has got in touch with us. What qualities do great leaders share? You've touched on it already, Lord Coe, whether you can reflect on that, and whether you can just outline for us some of the biggest challenges you've faced with London 2012 when things weren't going as well as you'd hoped. What went wrong behind the scenes? Give us an insight.
The very fact you can't actually identify what went wrong behind the scenes tells us we did a pretty good job, actually, in keeping that away from the media. I don't know. There's not a lot I would actually add to what Keith said. I think my general view, and I'm not trained as a manager. I'm not an MBA student. I'm not go to the Harvard Business School, but I've always instinctively and probably in part sort of osmotically picked that up from my sporting career, because I worked with a coach, Lynn knew very well, who brought together a team of extraordinary people. And he was never afraid to go out and be brave about the way he picked those teams. When a lot of people were saying, well, why are you wanting to spend 2 days every week on treadmills and having blood chemistry analysis back in the late 70s? That's, you're much better off going and running another 10 miles on the road. He was never afraid of challenging the orthodoxies. And I think if there's anything I learned from that period, it was be brave in the way you pick your teams, find the best people that you can possibly find, and make sure they're far smarter than you are. And then give them the space to do what they're very good at. And I think if I did anything during that, the delivery of the games, it was making sure that the teams that Keith assembled during the bid and the teams that we then assembled going forward weren't from, central casting. Our chief executive was somebody who'd spent 20 years in the complex world of investment banking. Our commercial director was somebody who had been one of the founding fathers of Sky Television. Our HR director, a very talented woman, came through from a very different and non-sporting background. It's not to say that you walk away from sport. You have to, that's what we wake up to do every morning. But it is to be brave about the teams that you pick and then give them the space to do it. And occasionally, when things don't go, there are challenges. And we know what those challenges were. They were around tickets. They were, the ongoing arguments. The challenges of any city bringing a security program to the table, making sure that 10,500 athletes move around the city with the precision of transportation. These are the big meaty pieces of the project. If you find the right quality of people, they'll figure that out. The real skill is letting them get on with that and protecting them from all the other things that could be an inhibitor just for their ability to go and do what they're very talented and very capable of doing.
Any questions from the floor to Laura McAllister? I want to see some hands. Anybody with a question for us here? There we go. There's one gentleman over there. If you would press the speaker button, ask your question, and then press the speaker button again when you finish. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Matt Newman, Chief Exec Welsh Athletics. Question for Laura, but also possibly for Sir Keith Mills and Lord Coe as well. I think one of the things that's been discussed about leadership was forward planning, looking ahead. And the Minister earlier spoke about possible financial challenges in the years ahead. And there's very much a pressure on governing bodies at the moment to be self-sufficient financially. And I know there's an agenda at the moment, both individually and collectively, to look at that. It was really just a question to get a sense of the appetite from the commercial sector to help support that agenda, and post-London, whether the private sector is up for that challenge.
Laura?
I think it is, from my experience. Certainly, I've had a lot to do with the business community over the last few years in Wales, mainly addressing kind of gatherings of business people. And the thing that has struck me most really is that the energy and enthusiasm and desire to be involved is there. I think probably where we've failed in sport is to actually offer them the right kind of opportunities to be involved, because we talk in very generic terms about links with the business and corporate sector without giving them a route into our sports. And I think where that's starting to change, it's making a big impact. I mean, I know of lots of governing bodies that have now got really strong commercial links, and they've brought commercially minded people onto their boards, and as a result they've become much more modern and outward facing. And I think our role in Sport Wales is simply to facilitate that. Really, the expertise lies within the governing bodies, and I think that's going to be, as Matt said, even more crucial as we face the kind of cuts that we all know are looming.
Do you think you were able to plug that gap? With the Minister warned of cuts this year, next year and the year after, it's going to be really, really tough. Do you think you will be able to make up that shortfall?
Well, I think we've got to look at it in a number of different ways, and I hinted at that in what I said earlier. For me, there are cost-effective options here, which are working in collaboration with health and education, because they bring a lot to the party, health and education, not least the fact that they have very, very big budgets in relation in relationship to sport. And I think actually we've done a lot of very, very positive work for education and health without actually having the alignment of budgets in that respect. So, you know, we're going to be talking to our partners in health and education starting next Monday with the launch of the school sport report. And we're going to be showing just what sport can bring to their agendas. And I think that is massively important if we're going to plug this enormous shortfall that we're going to face in the ensuing period.
Keith?
I think I mean, you're all here today, which is, I have to say, very impressive, Laura. And the more you collaborate, work together, and that goes for government too, the more the government collaborate and work together, the stronger you're going to be in raising the finance you need to do the job you have to do. And one of the things that I see a lot in sport, I see a lot in government too, incidentally, is the sort of silo mentality. And I think the more you guys can all work together, the more you'll engage better with the commercial sector. And let's be clear, most companies, certainly most companies that I've dealt with over the years, get involved in sport not because it's a philanthropic exercise. They get involved in sport because they intend to get something back. So if you go and talk to Procter & Gamble, they'll tell you that if sport can help them get to mums, then they're interested. And there are a whole bunch of sporting properties that could work collectively together to provide Procter & Gamble with an opportunity to get to mums. That's how they view it. And what I see a lot is NGBs in particular going in and trying to sell their sponsorship package in isolation to a company that's probably realistically, you know, not going to spend money on netball or basketball or badminton or whatever the sport happens to be. So my message to you all is, and I think Sport Wales is a very good facilitator in this, is to work together. Collectively, you have something that companies really want to embrace. With. Individually, it's much more challenging.
Lord Coe?
I think that is absolutely true. I think, I won't make this too lengthy, but I think a lot of things happened in 2008, and they weren't just the Beijing Games. We had the global financial collapse, and I think two things came out of that. One was I don't think we can be anywhere near as theological as we were up to that point about where the private sector and where the public sector sits. I mean, it's very clear and very obvious that those lines of demarcation are a lot less clear than they were, and smart private businesses are understanding a lot more about the private sector and the public sector. The public sector is learning and understanding a great deal more about the private sector, and that was a very good example from the Games. You know, when it was very interesting to sit in the middle, having had some experience on both sides of the fence, watching those theological divides slightly soften. You would see governments and the public sector thinking the private sector is sort of away over there doing what they're doing in the private sector. And some of the people that came to our table from the private sector saying, well, there's not a great deal that we're ever going to learn. And actually, they've learnt a lot, including Paul Dighton, our chief executive, who is now a government minister. So I think it's really important that for sport to understand and for those enabling organisations in sport to really make sure that that does not become a divide. The other big issue for me is about the trust of young people, because since 2008, I think that the level of trust of young people in our institutions is at an all-time low. And I think sport has a great opportunity to grab some of that territory because, you know, with occasional mutations, and we do have them in sport, most young people do see sport as a metaphor for life. It's not about patronage or circumstance. It's about hard work, great coaching, working collaboratively with you know, often in the early years in community-based sport. So I think that when sport goes to figure out what it's actually selling, it's also got a big opportunity to connect young people with organisations, because if you don't actually bridge that trust gap, they're going to sit outside the game, and that's not really what any organisation, either in the public or the private sector, wants, because it's simply not sustainable.
Question for Ruth now. John DeMade, thank you for your question. How do you think, Ruth, the legacy programme fits in with the health and well-being objectives in Wales? You're particularly interested in this, I guess, because you read NHS reports and we're in crisis. Obesity rates increasing. You'll want to have young people getting involved in sports and ensuring that sport is a part of their daily routine.
Absolutely. My mission is to get all of us more active. The evidence is just day in, day out. There's more and more evidence that as a nation, not just Wales, but a much further afield, we have to move more. And that's the basis for, setting a cultural expectation that we are physically active. There was research last week about if you're fit, whatever age you go before an operation, you do better, whether you're 85 or 35. Being fit is good. It makes you feel good. It's good for your mental well-being. There's just nothing that isn't terribly good about it. So there's a basic starting point, which is let's get everybody moving and physically active. And then on top of that, the opportunities to use sports to catalyse more of that in many different ways. My children are grown up now, but I did spend my Friday nights watching them swim up and down in the local swimming pool. And I used to read the British Medical Journal, but then eventually I realised there was a gym that I could go to that I could watch them. So, it's those creating those opportunities for added value. And when money's tight, those are the sorts of things we need to think about. Using school facilities out of hours, all sorts of different things. How do we get more people involved? We know that exercise at any age of life is critical, so let's get grandparents involved. Finding lots of different ways to create the expectation of being physically active as much as possible, building it into everything we do. So that's my mission. And then sport is such an inspiring part of that, isn't it? Just watching the success of Justin Rose last night, the golf and so on. It's just every day that somebody's inspired to say, well, I can have a go at that. But you need it in your local community as well, the points that were made. It's people who are the coaches, the volunteers. You get so much added value from sport in many of the ways that create well-being in local communities as well. So as you can see, I'm passionate and determined that we find ways of just getting everybody moving more.
That's okay. Another question from the floor. Who wants to put their hand up? Come on, there are hundreds of you here. Surely one hand. Am I missing anybody? Right. Gentleman there first, and then I'll come to you straight afterwards. If you press the speaker button on your pad and then turn it off after your question.
Yep, I've got it. Question directed at Lord Coe initially, but I wouldn't mind the other panellists' views as well. I'm assuming that Lord Coe's relationship with Steve Ovett had a massive impact on your success as an athlete. In your day-to-day life and your involvement in running a successful Olympics, what was your Steve Ovett on a day-to-day basis in terms of driving you forward and helping you deliver successful games?
My Steve Ovett. Is that working? Yes. I guess for me the mantra was always very simple. If you went across the senior teams, they would probably all contextualise the games in a very different way. Paul Dighton would probably tell you it's the only organisation he sat in where you double your numbers every year. Our commercial director would probably tell you that it's an unusual organisation where you start off with a £2 billion deficit and work your way back to sort of break even. And I'm sure that our head of security probably thinks he's been through the biggest security operation in the last 7 years with a little bit of sporting overlay dotted around London. I mean, it just depends how you see it. I will always see this through sport, and I guess for me it was about creating the very best environment for the athletes. Why do we deliver this? We deliver it for the athletes. Having been a competitor, I know when I'd been shortchanged in championships, I knew when the planning wasn't up to the standard it should have been. I rather turned up at a major championship. You assume that the village was there, the venues worked, the food would be on the table, the medals in whatever colour would turn up. And it was only when you got into that you realised, of course, that there was a mountain of work that went on behind the scenes. But what was it that drove me on a day-to-day basis? I never wanted to look in the eye any competitor, Olympic or Paralympic, and then turn around to me and say I wasn't able to do what I wanted to do because you guys didn't do everything you possibly could do to make sure that you removed every inhibitor from my ability to compete. And I guess that was for me the most important part of the games.
Another question here.
I wanted to ask a question about legacy and taking on board the comments about narrative and numbers and vision and measurement. I think a lot of people understand the vision of legacy, but what would actually delivery of a successful legacy mean to you in 10 years' time? What would that look like?
Who should we kick off? Keep your answers brief. We'll go around and we'll keep your answers brief. That was the final question. We're running out of time. I can smell lunch. It's coming soon. I'll start with you.
For me, Seb and I, when we were in Singapore, promised the world that we would try and use the games last year as a way of inspiring a generation. And so my vision of what success will be like is in 10 years' time, if there are a large number of young people that are engaged in sport and have more fulfilled lives as a result, inspired by people like you in this room. And I was mentioned in my introduction, my own contribution to this has been to help establish 2 foundations. One, International Inspiration, which Seb now chairs, which has helped 14 million young people around the world through sports programs in some of the developing countries around the world. And then the Sported Foundation, which is a foundation that we established in the UK to help disadvantaged kids, use sport to improve their lives. And there are 2 good examples of really tangible things that have happened as a result of the games. But I know there are hundreds more all over the country. And in 10 years' time, if we look back and see we've really made an impact on young people, then I think I'll be very happy.
Ruth?
Briefly, our physical activity figures in Wales have been flatlining for many years. Fewer than a third of the population take the recommended level of physical activity every week. I'm absolutely determined we have to shift that, and quickly.
Okay.
A sustainable increase in the number of particularly young people playing sport, and I include young people with disability and impairment. That's really important. We don't overlook that. The spiritual values of the games through volunteering and improving sport, but not just sport through the third sector, is really important. We link education, sport and culture as a holistic approach. That East London goes on doing what we know that it can do, and that more young people are being employed by businesses that are winning greater international market space because they were seen to be delivering successfully around the games.
And the final words, Laura.
I agree with all the other panellists, of course, but I think for me it's about really getting down to what can make the biggest difference. I mean, clearly we agree with the sentiments, but for me it's about working at the youngest age with the youngest children to give them the confidence and physical literacy journey that can enable them to take part in sport throughout their lives. And I think that requires a real behavioural change and a cultural change. It won't happen overnight, it'll happen generationally, but if we make the right interventions now in school sport, then I think we can really see something substantial change in the future.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel.